Hi there, my name is Hannah. I just wanted to introduce myself before jumping into the talk today. I work at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen and watch my talk today, and please do get in touch if you have any questions or comments.
In this talk today, I'd like to explore the sexual politics of a recent piece of secularism legislation that was passed in the Canadian province of Quebec in 2019. So I'm going to describe the secularism law, Bill 21, and put it into the context of both the global pandemic as well as other religious symbols bans in France. And then I'm going to explore what I argue are the distinctly Christian cultural politics at work in this example. Bill 21, an act respecting the laïcité or secularism of the state, prohibits all public employees from wearing religious symbols at work. The law applies to all public service sector employees, including educators, healthcare workers, police officers, lawyers, and judges. Bill 21 also requires that anyone giving or receiving public services, including healthcare or language training services, have their face uncovered. Now, this policy directly targets the small number of Muslim women in the province who wear the full face covering niqab. To ensure that it would hold up to constitutional scrutiny, which curtailed the passage of previously proposed secularism bills in the province, Bill 21 invokes the federal notwithstanding clause of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows a provincial government to temporarily override civil liberties protections, including freedom of religion. As soon as it was passed in June of 2019, Bill 21 faced severe backlash both within the province and outside Quebec. The National Council of Canadian Muslims and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association immediately contested the law in the courts. And on April 20th of this year, a Quebec Superior Court judge issued a convoluted ruling on the case protecting minority language rights but not religious freedom rights, and this was as a result of the invocation of the notwithstanding clause. So the result is that while the secularism law will not pertain to members of the province's National Assembly or employees at English language schools, it will continue to affect other public service sector employees as well as those who work in French language schools throughout the province. So the ruling will likely be appealed by both the government as well as the plaintiffs. Now, at the same time that debate has circulated around Bill 21, the coronavirus pandemic has normalized face coverings for reasons of health and safety. Catherine Bullock penned a piece early on in the pandemic drawing out this hypocrisy when she wrote in The Conversation that we are all niqabis now. Jasmine Zine further teases out the racialized implications of masking in a piece published late last year in Topia, the Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies. Zine describes the phenomenon of white mask privilege, wherein white people who mask are perceived as upholding norms of responsible citizenship, while Black, Asian, and racialized Muslim mask wearers are consistently construed as what she calls folk devils. So if the pandemic has made crystal clear that secularism laws that target face coverings are not about the coverings themselves, but rather about the people wearing them, this has not fundamentally eroded the broader discursive and political alliance between secularism and neutrality. We've seen this presumption of neutrality advanced in France, for instance, where the hijab has been prohibited in public schools since 2004 and the niqab banned from public spaces since 2011. In 2016, dozens of beach towns, including Cannes and Nice, passed ordinances prohibiting people from wearing the burkini, which you can see here, a swim garment which resembles a wetsuit, and this was in the interests of health and safety. Now, while the burkini ban was overruled by the Conseil d'État, the other prohibitions on conspicuous religious clothing throughout the French state continue to disproportionately affect religious minorities, right? There's no inconspicuous version of a headscarf or a Sikh turban. One particularly infamous photo that circulated in August of 2016 showcases 3 white male police officers looming over a woman sitting on the beach in Nice, forcing her to disrobe in public view. So this image encapsulates the contradictory nature of secularism legislation. Purportedly enacted in the interests of security and gender equality, This legislation reinforces a colonial male gaze which demands visibility, yet cannot see the political subjectivity of Muslim women who wear the veil. So what cultural politics are at work in this deployment of secularism as both normative ideal and political discourse? I've previously argued that liberalism itself contains the residue of Christianity. And this is true even in contexts where there is a constitutional separation of church and state. So the result of what I call Christian liberalism is that Christian expressions are easily accommodated, recognized, and even rendered invisible through the language of cultural heritage. We can see an example of this in Bill 21, and this is language that borrows from previous secularism bills. So it reads the following, quote, "This act must not be interpreted as affecting the emblematic or toponymic elements of Quebec's cultural heritage, in particular of its religious cultural heritage that testify to its history." So as a result, public displays of Catholicism become signifiers of the province's religious cultural heritage, exempting them from the secularism law. Because the liberal state is never neutral when it comes to adjudicating religious freedom claims, attempts at legislating secularism likewise reproduce existing cultural norms. In her 2018 book, Sex and Secularism, Joan Wallach Scott argues that secularism is a political discourse premised on gender inequality at the outset. Following Talal Assad's genealogy of secularism, Scott interrogates the cultural politics of secularism as an ideology, highlighting the Christian moral rationality which informs its deployment, especially against Islamic cultures and societies. And while Scott draws attention to the ways that race and gender are socially constructed categories of difference, which get applied in disparate ways, right? Racial otherness is never subsumed in the same way that sexual otherness must be for the propagation of the family. She's ultimately somewhat dismissive of intersectionality as a way to account for these differential components of identity. So in my work, I'm interested in the intersectional facets of identity that inform secularism legislation and its passage. So here I'm thinking not only of the ways that racialized Muslim women and other religious minorities are disproportionately affected by these laws, I'm also thinking about the ways that the supposedly secular or lay state is also deeply Christian. By erasing the specificity of this Christianity, as when the provincial government in Quebec finally removed the large crucifix that was hanging in the National Assembly, and this was following calls of hypocrisy around Bill 21, the state is not then automatically rendered religiously neutral. So what's more, the language of secularism, I argue, actively obscures this residue of cultural Christianity, such that discussions of religion are both racialized and confined to minority groups. By way of a brief conclusion then, I'd like to propose that we consider the role of intersecting facets of identity that pertain not only to the subjects of religious symbols bans or prohibitions on clothing, but also to dominant groups. And in particular, that we attend to the overlapping roles played by whiteness, Christianity, secularism, and patriarchal sexual politics here in shaping the contours of debates around religious freedom, around reasonable forms of accommodation, and multicultural tolerance. So only in doing so might we be able to begin to see the ideological connections across different kinds of oppressive regimes, be they explicitly religious or purportedly secular, and continue to devise strategies for collective resistance.